Hello and welcome. I'm Anand Naidu, filling in for Riz Khan. On today's show, we commemorate the 60th anniversary of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. The Declaration is a far-reaching and ambitious document. It outlines the basic human rights that should be enjoyed by every individual on Earth. Among its provisions, people should be free to choose their own government and have freedom of expression and religion. It also condemns slavery and torture. 192 UN members signed the declaration and all have incorporated it into their legal systems. Despite that, human rights violations persist. Children are still abused, genocide still takes place, and there is widespread religious intolerance. Today we take stock of the Declaration of Human Rights as it marks its 60th birthday. Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com/AJE. Enter the chat room and take part. We also welcome your phone calls on the show. Joining our program, the United Nations Commissioner for Human Rights, Navi Pillay. She joins us from UN headquarters in New York. Now, later in the program, we will also be talking to Philippe Sands, author of Torture Team. But first, let's go to New York and Navi Pillay. Thanks for joining us.
Great pleasure to be here, Anand.
Now, in talking about human rights, when we look at the world today, it would appear that human rights has in many places taken a bit of a back seat. We have the world's most powerful democracy, the place where I'm sitting right now, the United States, which appears to be bending its rules to its own liking when it comes to issues like arbitrary detention and torture. This continuing genocide in Darfur, looking at other parts of the world. Zimbabwe is imploding, and every day there are new reports of human trafficking, especially in Europe and Asia, literally people being bought and sold. So my question is, are the challenges for you and the United Nations Human Rights Agency just as formidable now as they were 60 years ago when that declaration was adopted, or has it in fact got even harder?
I think the challenges are there because of the ongoing conflicts, genocidal acts and acts of torture that you mentioned. However, what we have now is a very strong tool in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which sets out foundational principles to which every state has agreed. Now, when you want to hold a state or a violator of human rights accountable, you need a standard, you need a rule, and we have that in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That standard helps the rights holders, that's us ordinary people, the knowledge to claim your right, and it helps us to hold states accountable to the obligations they undertook. So the tasks are formidable, but at least we have this very important tool handed to us in the form of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Now, when you talk about those foundational principles or the standards that you referred to, do they have the necessary legal teeth, in your belief, to make sure or to bring the violators of human rights to justice?
Well, I want to answer that in two ways. One is the Human Rights Council. 2 years ago, the states got together in the General Assembly and changed the old Human Rights Commission into a Human Rights Council. And in this council, every state, all 192 states, have a turn to have their human rights record scrutinized by all the other countries. So it's called the Universal Periodic Review, and it's not judgmental, it's a scrutiny, criticism and recommendations, and my office helps states to build capacity, to have training workshops, and to help to prepare for this UPR process. So that's one mechanism. The other is that the world never had any mechanism to bring serious violators of crimes such as genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes, to bring them to account. Many of these political and military leaders, after killing thousands of people or robbing the economic resources of their country, got safe shelter in other countries, and there was no mechanism by which ordinary people could bring an end to that kind of impunity until we had the international criminal tribunals for former Yugoslavia and Rwanda, and now the International Criminal Court, which can prosecute individuals who have committed these serious crimes.
Well, let me ask you about that review process that you're talking about, that peer review process. Now, the Human Rights Council, as far as I know, has held 6 special sessions in which they listen to grievances, and 4 of those sessions so far have been about Israel. In fact, it's turned into a bit of an Israeli bashing exercise. There were 2 other sessions held, and they were on 2 other issues. But what about the other human rights issues that we're facing right now, issues in Zimbabwe, in Iran, in Belarus?
This was before my time, of course, but it's a fact that they had 8 special sessions, and about 6 of them or 4 of them were devoted to Israel, but not Israel in the sense of its own human rights record in its country, but Israel in its capacity as occupying force over Palestine and Gaza. And I was told that the special sessions were held when something happened. For instance, Beit Hanun, there were 19 people killed, and Archbishop Dennis Tutu was then appointed by the Human Rights Council to investigate that matter and report. So those special sessions were usually inspired by something dramatic, violating the rights of civilians in Palestine, that were the reason for those sessions. The Human Rights Council has also held thematic sessions, for instance, on the right to food, and their very last session, held 2 weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago, was on the Democratic Republic of Congo.
What about a situation like Zimbabwe? Should not the UN Human Rights Council be more vocal in what is going on there right now?
The Secretary General has been, and I know the Council of Elders have tried to enter the country. I have an office based in Pretoria, which is for the whole of Southern Africa, SADC territories, and they have been continually seeking permission to visit Zimbabwe. The situation is critical. Not only because the people are starving there and the economy is in crisis, but also because of the recent outbreak of cholera, which has taken 600 lives in a very short while. I myself have been urging the government of Zimbabwe to finalize the peace agreement, and above all to respect human rights of the citizens of Zimbabwe.
But what kind of recourse does an organization like the UN Human Rights Council have legally? Would it not be more effective if the United Nations had threatened Robert Mugabe with an indictment, with an appearance before the International Court of Justice, to prevent what is going on in Zimbabwe right now?
Firstly, the Human Rights Council has this universal peer review, so it's countries looking at each other's records. There is no penalty involved. It's just voluntary participation by all countries.
And is that a shortcoming in the manner in which it operates?
Well, it's an improvement in the last Human Rights Commission, where it was a question of exposing a country to shame, and we all know that didn't help the victims on the ground. And we are hoping where countries voluntarily undertake to be accountable, that we can at least achieve improvements on the ground for victims. And now it's a Security Council that is the supreme political body in the United Nations that can take actions such as sanctions or reporting the head of Zimbabwe for criminal investigation by the International Criminal Court. So those are political questions to be addressed by the Security Council.
There's one other question I have, and this is more of a general question. There is a perception, especially in developing countries, that economic growth and human rights are mutually exclusive, that you can either have one or the other, you can't have both. You've addressed this yourself, and I was wondering, what will it take to convince governments that these two issues are not mutually exclusive, that they're not incompatible, that you can have both of them?
The most convincing statement is the Universal Declaration, which doesn't rank rights. It sets out civil, political, economic, social, and cultural as universal rights that all people all over are entitled to. So it's without discrimination, those rights. Now, in the developing countries, of course, the lack of economic and social rights are far more relevant to them, and they have, justifiably or not, criticized the fact that the focus has so far been on issues such as liberty and freedoms, which are civil rights, rather than basic rights such as the right to food, right to housing, and right to health, which are major concerns for the developing world, particularly now when the financial crisis is expected to hit economic and social rights, and those of the poorest and least developed countries the most.
The United States has kept its distance from the Human Rights Council. How much of a problem is that for you?
The United States has not been participating in the work of the Human Rights Council. There are 46 members of the Human Rights Council, and they are elected by other member states, and the United States was not elected as a member. I am encouraging them to stand again for membership at the next round of elections, and I am encouraging them to participate in the proceedings of the Human Rights Council. They are an extremely important avenue for change in this world. They're a superpower, and their presence is necessary at all institutions and venues in the United Nations. They need to maximize their participation. They need to play a role to re-establish cooperation and understanding among states.
Okay, we have a caller on the line. This is Shakir from the United Kingdom. Shakir, go ahead with your question.
Okay, my question is just everyone knows that Israel and the U.S. are constantly violating human rights all around the world, but no one is going to punish them. No one is going to ask them even, why are you doing so? No government is going to ask them the question. What's the reason, and what can we do for it?
Okay, Ms. Pillay?
Well, Anand, the Secretary General has been critical, so have I. I've issued a statement on Israel's blockade of humanitarian aid of food and fuel and water to people in Gaza. So that's public criticisms we have made. We've called upon Israel to end that blockade immediately. I have done so, the Secretary General, and so has the Commissioner General of UN refugees organizations. With regard to the United States, my predecessor, Louise Arbour, strongly condemned the Guantanamo detentions and asked for the immediate release of the detainees, and she was critical of due process violations such as arbitrary detention and torture. And I continue to uphold her statement on that matter.
And that's where we're going to have to leave it for now. Navi Pillay, UN Commissioner for Human Rights, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And we are going to take a short break. On the other side of that break, we'll continue our discussion with Philippe Sands, author of Torture Team, Deception, Cruelty and the Compromise of Law. And a reminder again that you can join the conversation with your questions and comments by logging on to livestation.com and entering the chat room. You can see the debate taking place right now. We'll be right back.